Hello, today is Wednesday, September 26th, 2018. This is the standard kubeadm office hours. And today, the only thing I have on the agenda currently is 113 planning or hit list for 113. Uh, I don't really want to go into the minutia or the details of some things. I want to stay at a high enough level where it's pretty transparent. And then once we break down those work items, I'm sure there'll be a ton of details there. So the first one that's totally apparent to almost everyone is push the config v1 bay1. Are there any
So,
questions? Go ahead.
uh, should we keep the format where we create a Google Doc and paste an example in there? Basically, everybody starts proposing changes. And is this the right format?
Well, Fabrizio already has the original doc and he's already going right now. So I think what we'll do is we'll use his checklist that he already has along with the original document. There's going to be some minor modifications, just like what happened in V1 Alpha 3. But I think we already have the docs in place. I think what Fabrizio will probably do is propose a couple of other minor changes that we'll need to tweak because the original proposal that we had come up with Lucas a while ago has some holes in it, some deficiencies. So I know that we made some last minute change, not last minute, but we made some changes near the end of the code freeze last cycle because we didn't have a solution to some of the HA concerns, right? So I think creating a doc with Fabrizio, because we already have many docs, and then use his current checklist issue that is open right now. Because there's already known things we need to do, and then we'll have to I'm sure there's going to be minor stuff we're going to have to fix up that we find.
Yeah, sounds good. So the proposal from yesterday, this is related to the config, of course. There was a proposal yesterday for the, I don't know what the name was, the container, no, the tool that Google is developing that can store all the manifests that we have.
Yeah, I would consider that like a feature gated type of thing. What's the name of that thing? Hold on one second here.
Yeah, I can pull it out. I can pull it out as well.
I think that would be nice to have if somebody wants to engage on the shiny new front. I think that would be an interesting shiny new area, but I wouldn't consider it like priority for this one. I think.
Yeah, I was thinking about the add-ons because I have a proposal about how we should implement the add-ons in a way that the users can modify the manifest for the add-ons. And the question here is, should we do this for the beta config, or perhaps we should delay this until somebody starts investigating the Google solution?
I think investigating the Google solution should happen. What's his name? One of your cameras have gone crazy, so I was kind of losing it there. I think writing up a proposal for it, I don't think it's a blocker because I think you can probably implement those things independently, right? For the configuration changes, or you should be able to. I think the config changes of separating out the componentry, for lack of a better word, is probably the highest priority, right? So that it's into its separate, distinct pieces so we don't have the depth graph of doom. And we finish off some of the other HA issues that have cropped up with regards to the config.
Yeah, because the add-ons, I'm thinking about the beta. I mean the state of beta, because if we hit beta, to my understanding, we shouldn't modify the config after that. It's solid, but I mean beta in Kubernetes has a slightly different meaning. So that's why I'm thinking about the add-ons, because the add-ons are essentially part of the cluster configuration.
Yeah, there's nothing that prevents us from making changes. We just have to the change with beta is just that you have to support the previous version across multiple cycles. And given the state of our contract for kubeadm, because it's a tool outside of it and we only go for one release, we just have to make sure that there's consistency across that. So I'm not terribly concerned. But I think it is worthwhile to open up an issue and investigate that, because I think the UX experience was much cleaner to have the idea, at least, of having a bundle versus having the separate configs all kind of dash 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 separated would be a lot easier for most people to grok.
Well, it's the coaster bundle. That was the name of the project. With the new GitHub user interface, I cannot find my start projects for some reason. Anyway, I mean, I guess we can start with what Fabrizio has, and if anybody has concerns, we can start creating issues for them.
Mm-hmm. The next one is moving phases to beta and getting rid of the alpha phases subcommand, or at least the alpha portion of the phases. I don't think there's any concern there. I think we do want to have the split where we want to still have the subcommand for phases and the reference for the individual subcommands to kind of co-reference each other. So like you'd want kubeadm, you'd want to be able to use the subcommand underneath init and join as well as in phases. So that way a person could execute the individual phases separately. So they'd have a unified way to view the stages that we go through. I think the problem we currently have, and I think what we need to start to solve in this cycle, is to have a clearly defined step-by-step set of what are all the phases and what are the order in which they occur. Like even having a subcommand for phases that outlines this is the order that it typically occurs in.
Yeah, I already reviewed the KEP for Fabrizio about phases. We discussed some ideas in there. Like for instance, we discussed should we support phase command flags to be passed to the separate. For instance, you can call kubeadm init and list a bunch of phases that you want to execute. And we were discussing we were discussing if you should be able to also pass the flags to subcommands. Fabrizio explained to me that that's not a good idea. I should post the link to the KEP.
Yeah, why don't you do that inside the doc here? Is there anyone that wants to help review the rejiggering of phases to have a cleaner UX? We get asked almost every single cycle about having a well-defined set of independent phases and having it flow in the output. So that way it's like really clear to the user of what exactly is transpiring in what phase.
Is this one of those things we're talking about where you can list the phases for, say, kubeadm init, and you'll get a list of phases that it's going to run? Or is this just breaking out the alpha command?
It's trying to we need to find a final home for how we want phases to work, right? And Fabrizio has a current proposal in place, but like all proposals, they sound good and we put it on paper and we write it down, and then we start using it, and then we kind of change what we're originally thinking. So what I'm kind of looking for is someone to try to drive the UX experience, given the plethora of feedback we've had over time, to have a canonical way for how we can view the phases, view the output from kubeadm, and run the individual phases separately.
So Fabrizio's current KEP, you can have a look. I posted the link. So he gives some examples, like you should be able to call kubeadm init and provide, like you say, a list of the phases you want to execute. And for instance, you can call the search phase, the bootstrap phase, whatever, the kubelet phase. And from there, we have to handle all the situations where, like for instance, if the user decided to execute a phase that is completely out of order, and I see Fabrizio, the idea here is to basically handle all the situations where the user, we should respect the list the user provides, but we should handle it.
So here's a question I don't know the answer to. Like I get a little weirded out by the notion of overloading init with the sub DAG of phases versus a person individually executing the phases themselves, so long as they know that the order of the DAG is something that's explicit versus implicit, right? They've chosen to do phases separately versus tacking on a subset or order semi-structured list that you've created, into init itself.
Well, I think as long as the phases are contained under this phase subcommands, I think we are good.
Yeah, why don't we take this to the KEP and start to hammer it out, the details there. I'd like to just go with the simplest approach and be more explicit than to try to be overly convenient for a very small subset of users.
Fabrizio, do you want to say something about the phases?
No, I think that the idea is around from time. I saw in the issues and in Slack that people are starting using phases a lot, and so I'm totally in trying to get something better in terms of user experience. This is why I prepared the second release of the KEP, but of course we need agreement. One point that I want to stress that we have to find a good trade-off also in terms of maintainability of phases. Yeah, and also I think that one thing that we have to be clear is what are phases, because over time there are many things conflated under the kubeadm alpha phases umbrella, but originally phases were a chunk of the init or other kubeadm workflow. So for instance, if you think about the renew command, which is now a phases, if I don't remember well, if I remember well, the renew command technically is not a phases. It should be hosted in a new kubeadm command. So in my point of view, there is the UX experience, but before we have to define what is a phase for us, just to cut out what should not be part of a phase.
I agree. The renew command, probably we shouldn't have added it into a phase, even if it's part of the certificates phase. It's like a separate user experience.
It's part of certificate management, not of certificate phase. If you want to define terms, so and defining terms is not helps to give a consistent user experience.
Yeah, the biggest problem here is that if we want to remove a command that is already added somewhere, if we remove it, we have to follow the whole deprecation cycle, because it's going to break all setups. So we have to be very careful where we put the commands.
Well, so long as it's not, right now, anything that's underneath alpha phases, we can nuke. We have that right. But anything underneath a knit and join, we do not have that right. So we have to make sure that we Mark has deprecated anything that we're going to shuffle around. But we've been pretty explicit with the top level subcommands about what their capabilities are. So I think what I'd like to do is take a subgroup of folks that really want to work on the UX experience to kind of drive this over the line and have them almost work in high bandwidth together to take a look at Fabrizio's proposal and to take a look at what's there and to try and churn on it to come up with a solution that, you know, we can live with into the kubeadm GA.
It goes without saying I'm in this effort, and also I have an implementation of a prototype of the new cap that I used to. So if we schedule some dedicated session, we can also work with something at end.
I think I have to be involved, just to at least give like a thumbs up, thumbs down for some of the pieces there. I know I don't see Liz volunteering, but I don't want to voluntold either. Like your UX experience would be helpful there to make sure that it's clean and concise.
Man, you just told me that I was going to be working on cluster API.
You are going to be working. You're going to be we're all going to be straddling both, right?
Oh, great. Excellent. I'm so excited.
So right now you are working on cluster API, but I fully expect us to be ping-ponging across the...
All right. Put my name on some issues. Let's do this.
So I can help with the actual move of the alpha phase commands to a root command called kubeadm phase, but the backend work, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to help with that. So I'm gonna start working on this probably in the next couple of weeks.
I can start looking at it now. I'm held up on the 112 release for other work, so I can start looking at the proposal hopefully this afternoon in between reviewing some of these other PRs that are kind of flying around that have nothing to do with SIG cluster lifecycle. So phase is a P0, config is a P0 for this release. Those are the two most important things we have to do. I'd probably put add-on management with bundles probably as a P2, to be honest. I think it'd be nice to have, but it's not a requirement. One thing I want to put as almost as like a P1 level priority is packaging. And to have like, to stop doing this split packaging and to actually not even do the Basiling of the packaging, but actually have spec files and just have Basil build the artifacts from the details of the spec and the Debian packaging, as if it put all the stuff underneath the main repository, and all artifacts come from that source.
So in terms of Bazel, I have a question about why it doesn't support architectures, but I'm going to leave it to another.
I think it's irrelevant. You could execute Bazel or make for the multi-arch support, and it shouldn't matter. So long as the spec file or the Debian packaging stuff is all there, you should be able to build it independently. And I think there's a minor problem in that we've sort of did this RPM spec auto generation piece inside of the Bazel stuff, which actually doesn't help us because then it puts that hard dependency on Bazel itself. If we just unwrap the spec and just have the generation of the artifacts, which is just going to call a container to call build root on these artifacts, right? It's irrelevant. Like you could use make or Bazel as long as you have the details. You have input, output. But
that's what the release repo is doing, isn't it?
That is what the release repo is doing. But having it be in the main line and disentangling everything else. Because right now we have our own build stuff there, and you have your separate build stuff in the release repository.
Mm-hmm. And they're two, at this point, so quite different, quite different builds.
And if we wanted to use like if Jason has opinions on wanting to use a generic package spec format that does generation for both RPMs and debs, I don't even care.
But you don't like having the RPM spec files generated with Bazel?
Yeah, I think that conflates the problem, because then when the problem we've had with Bazel is that it can't cross-compile like ARM artifacts because of the SIGO problem, which no one has actually pointed me at an issue. It's magic hand wavy Googleisms that says that SIGO doesn't work with this, and I don't have any idea what the details are. I can't expect. But I do know that we can do everything with make. And the make and build system is already all there. The only thing we need are the actual artifacts to call the execution of the container that builds and generates the artifacts.
I'm going to be at BazelCon on the 9th and 10th of October, so I plan on haranguing everyone I can get my hands on about why SIGO doesn't work.
Yeah, and just to what's the deal with multi-arch support?
I had a separate question, because I don't understand the release tooling very well. And nobody does, yeah.
Does anyone?
Except for Caleb, probably. So what we do, we push the debs and RPMs to the Google repository. And my question is, do we want to eventually stop doing that? And for instance, if I go to the Bazel website, looking at Bazel as a tool that has a binaries for download, I see that they have a binary installer. So you can download the binary installer, you can run it locally, and it installs all the things you need to use Bazel. So has this been a consideration for Kubernetes eventually?
So originally I talked many times about building the grand unified container for kubeadm, and we had pieces of this in the past where you don't even care. The container contains all the details, and you execute a single command into the container, and whether you're in a Debian host or you're on a Red Hat-ish style host with RPMs, it would just install the unit file and the other details and put the entries in the package management system. The problem with that is no one wanted to take ownership of that, and people are used to consuming stuff from RPMs and debs in traditional fashion. So we've always maintained that. But I do think it's been an albatross for many releases now. And I would like to I don't exactly know what the date is for, looking at my non-existent watch, I don't exactly know what the date is for the release for 113 is. Does anyone know the actual release date?
Well, 3 months from now. Is it February, the end of February? No, I don't think that's good.
It's usually always right before KubeCon or right at KubeCon.
Oh, I'm confused. So it's I think it's Christmas, pretty much.
Yes. After KubeCon last year.
So ideally, I'd like to have this problem solved. The problem is getting somebody to want to push it over the line and get it finished and own it.
So seeing, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, I think there's something going on right now in the release world about the release repo. I haven't been tracking that work, but they seem to not be updating the release repo. And they are updating the Bazel builds. So for example, the CryTool stuff got updated in Bazel, but not in the release repo.
I've been monitoring the release process very closely. It's not an assignment for me. I've been doing it in my personal time. And I have to say that every single change you try to do into the release tooling, you might encounter a lot of PR reviews to be, how to put it, you might face some blockers there. So it's going to be a very slow process. And I have concerns that this is doable for 113.
So it depends upon who the release manager is. for 113, and if we start early, and we have people that can commit to driving it over the finish line.
Yeah, I think that it pretty much should be Google who make the initial push to like deprecate this release tooling and move it to the community, and the community then can decide, hey, we might use a container, or we might decide to use like an installer. I don't know.
Well, that's part
But
of what DIMS is working on. So I see their DIMS. Like the CNC effort, is there any timeline for some of that stuff?
No, not yet. It's almost like right now we are just trying to get the feel of the land. And this was the release where we were trying to figure out where things are, starting with the images and the release artifacts and things like that. You know, we had this question about the depths and the RPMs, where they live and how they get pushed. And so far, it's just been discovery. We still have to start filing caps soon enough, but then we need people to work on that too. So if anybody is interested in that kind of work, it definitely making sure that the things in the release repository and the main KK repository need to be synced up somehow. I just added a comment in the PR for the CRI tool saying that it's not enough just to do it in KK. We have to do it in K release too. So yeah, no, not good so far.
Who's going to be driving execution of this stuff? Is it going to be the working group?
Yeah, there is a bunch of us who signed up to say, okay, we'll try to do something. We do not have like a normal SIG lead or anything like that yet. So it's just whatever each person is doing, we are trying to take notes and log issues and things like that. So that's where we are right now. It would be good to have like a formal definition of what this thing is, whether it is a work group or a SIG, and how we should. So the only thing we have right now is the bi-weekly calls and the doc where we are gathering information.
What was the name of the working group, DIMS?
Yeah, we don't know whether it is a working group or a SIG. It's just a Slack channel at this point. Kate's infra team on Slack.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So if you're interested in that call, I have the pen to the calendar invite, or anybody else who's already in that call can edit it too. So just let me know and I'll add you to it.
So this is one of those things that have been, it bites us every single release, and it is an albatross now at this point.
Right. This release, we found more information because Doug M was driving was pushing the buttons on the release scripts themselves. So we were able to uncover a lot more things than we usually do when things are behind the scenes. And the build of the RPMs and the depths also, we were able to make some progress because we got some information from Caleb towards the end, saying these are the commands that we use and how we do it. I was actually able to cut the RC2 depths and RPMs by myself, and I threw it somewhere in a repository and tried it out. So yeah, at this point, I think we are looking for a place to start, and my inclination is to get a GCP project where we can build a utility cluster and, for example, move the publish bot in there. That'll give us like the ACLs that are required, a place to host directories, a place to run things, and then experiment can progress from there, I think. At least that's what I'm going to propose on Friday.
Chuck, if you want to tag team with me on some of this stuff, I think this is going to be intermingled with the the previous bullet point, but we'll need to, the previous bullet point on the doc list currently and this one are going to be tightly coupled.
Yeah, this is not going to be like a full-time job or anything like that. It'll be like half an hour here, half an hour there over a long period of time. So we don't drop the ball and keep all the balls in the air, so to say.
Does anyone from SUSE want to help with this effort, seeing how they've made patches and suggestions on the RPMs, which don't really live anywhere?
Yeah, I'm definitely volunteering. I also want to sort out the SE Linux support for Red Hat systems, which requires RPM changes anyway.
Awesome.
That sounds good, Nader. Thank you.
The next one on the list is test automation. Kubernetes Anywhere has got to die with fire. And I want to replace it with the work that we're doing for Cluster API because we're using kubeadm directly for the MVP. We do need to set up Jiggery with that, and I do want to have automated HA deploys as part of the testing for kubeadm. We've never done this before. This will be a first, but it will put, I'm basically signing Jason, Liz, and Chuck all up into the hot seat for this one to get this in place. So it'll basically set up the test apparatus in Jiggery so that we actually have CI signal from the Cluster API MVP that they're currently working on to deploy kubeadm latest on the test Jiggery.
Yeah, can I say something here? Can we make sure that this works on like AWS first instead of GCP?
Yes, that's the intent, actually.
Okay, good.
They're working on the AWS implementation of Cluster API.
Perfect, thank you.
That was my question, like what cloud provider are you going to use for the hosting of virtual machines?
It will definitely be AWS as the default.
All right.
Because Google will always eventually put their stuff in place. So I think we can rely on that happening at some point in time. I don't think I'd want to do that as the default because, you know, we have limited resources and there's a higher value target and more users available in the AWS land.
We should also try to recruit like Dee Nishi and her team to see if they'll be interested in this work too.
I've been trying to recruit Dinishi on Cluster API work for some time. I think it's been a resource limited problem from the Amazon perspective, which is, it's difficult for me to fathom given that they're like the biggest cloud.
Yeah.
So I see a big problem at TestGrid is that most of the tests run on Google infrastructure. There's nothing wrong with that, but if it can be 50-50 with the AWS, I think we are going to have much better coverage. So I wanted to ask something else here about AWS, because I haven't used it for a very long time. Do they have like free accounts? Because Google, you know, you can have cheap virtual machines and stuff like that. What is the state of AWS? For instance, can I test AWS without paying and stuff like that?
You should be able to get all of the signal auto hooked up. We have to talk with the test infra folks that get the credits from the CNCF. But this should not be on anyone's dime. This should be part of the test automation and the credits that are donated to the CNCF. They're a platinum sponsor, and all that test automation should be jigged through there. And it'll be a periodic job, not a blocking PR job. There's other issues I want to talk with the test infra folks that are unrelated to SIG cluster lifecycle about getting other things out of the PR blocking space.
That would be great. If we have access as well to some sort of accounts to do our own testing, if a CI is failing and we don't have a way to debug it.
Well, I think the other thing here too is we probably are going to have to leverage some portions of federated testing. And I really want to put in some of the details that we put into Sonobui into place, not because it's a Heptio thing, but because it allows you to debug the problem because a lot of times we don't actually have all the data we need to debug the problems. So you're kind of beautiful minding some of the issues that come there. And I feel like, if I had a board with like wire wrapped around it, you'd probably like see how we kind of debug some of these problems, right?
Yeah, we don't have details on the pods even. I'm going to add these in Kubernetes Anywhere until we get the cluster API.
So yeah, we don't have pod logs, right, which is one of the biggest problems, right? So that's kind of a goal this cycle. I want to talk with the kubespray folks if they're going to default to kubeadm deployments. I mean, if we want to have a GCP deployer that kind of covers across the cluster lifecycle, I would ideally like it if they would have a periodic job to replace Kubernetes Anywhere for GCP to have a deployer for that. That would be, this would be like a super nice to have if they're going to default to kubeadm deployments in 113. But, I think I need to do some social judo there to make that happen. Also, Lubomir, if you want to replace the Kubernetes Anywhere work with kubespray, that's also, would be helpful.
Well, that's, from my perspective, that will be like a effort on another front next to the work with the cluster API. My idea was to patch Kubernetes Anywhere as much as possible. So first of all, do you have an estimate? Can we get this like after the first month of the cycle or the second month? Or
I'm going to put this as a hard deliverable after we evaluate post MVP, which is going to be like a week-ish from now. So after that, this is like the highest priority task item, other than a couple of feature additions that people have requested with regards to variants, because we need signal. It's important.
Yeah.
And we don't have it.
Yeah, so I'm probably going to stick with patching Kubernetes Anywhere for now.
Mm-hmm.
I have an example where Kubernetes Anywhere is currently green, but I'm seeing a failure in the kubelet in the master branch. So the signal is not even correct currently, because it's probably to the old Docker version, which is 112 in yeah.
That's another conundrum with some of the deployment of Kubernetes Anywhere, right? Is that we've already moved the stack needle, and we need to update all the dependencies of moving the stack. And the maintenance burden there is annoyingly high, especially with regards to debugging. So I want to bypass all of that because we need to get the other signal up in place for other reasons. So getting that signal in place would be beneficial to Heptio, the community, everybody, because we don't even have HA signal currently.
Yeah.
So this is Jason, Chuck, is Tim. Somebody put clean up self-hosting. Is that remove self-hosting?
Yes.
Right.
Clean up code.
We should remove deprecated everything, right? Because we have a couple other things that are deprecated too. And we need to clean up the core DNS flag feature thing. So remove deprecated, remove, clean up, deprecated.
It's not clear what do you mean with the core DNS things.
The core DNS has a feature flag that allows you, it's the reverse feature flag. We never just actually set the default all the way through to be clean. So we have this weird inverted feature gate for the default enablement of core DNS.
Okay, this will become part of the config, in my opinion.
Yes, exactly. So like I just put general cleanup, remove and cleanup deprecated and promoted.
So I was speaking with Tim Hawking about this. There is a K website PR that currently there is activity there to define the feature gate deprecation process. and James knows about it. Basically, the situation there is that I'm saying that core DNS as a feature gate right now serves a good purpose for us, because with a Boolean flag we can pretty much toggle between kubeDNS and core DNS. So my proposal was that we don't remove the feature gate until kubeDNS is deprecated completely, or removed completely rather.
Well, we should at least rename it. Like right now, it should be a feature gate to enable kubeDNS instead of like inverting the defaults for the feature gate to be on, because that doesn't make any sense, right? So cleaning up that is a general thing we should do, right? Because right now it's like feature gates are typically an opt-in. You have to explicitly specify them to opt in, but right now it's defaulted to true or yes. So we should invert that and call it feature gate enable legacy kubeDNS or something like that, and turn it off by default.
Yeah, the problem is that we are going to break like existing users, even if the gate is alpha currently. It's not alpha even, it's GA.
Feature gates by definition can be broken, right? Because they're an opt-in thing. They're not default behavior, and they're never for GA type of things. I think we're switching core. This is the first time we're actually like transitioning something that got promoted to be the default. We don't usually do that very often. And I know that we're trying to work out the semantics there, but I don't think many people are going to care about the legacy version of the feature gated flag across the release cycle. Because right now it's inverted, like I mentioned before, it's weird.
Can I ask something here? Do you expect somebody else to be at the same level as kubeDNS and core DNS ever?
No.
No. Okay. So we are just waiting for kubeDNS to go away, and it's not going away.
Well, that's not necessarily true. What's happening is like people are running scale tests and finding out a bunch of weird issues, and it's basically defaulting, and every new technology that gets defaulted on requires a maturity cycle in order for it to find what are the same defaults that work across the widest swath of things, and they find and fix scale bugs, and it's just a process, right?
So we don't want to add a separate flag for switching back and continue to use feature gates. What do we want to do?
Ideally, I would like to just name the feature gate enable kubeDNS or something like that. Because right now it's enable core DNS and it's defaulted to true, which doesn't make any sense because it should be the default.
Yeah, in that PR that we were talking about just now, what we said there was, look, if you have a flag, if you are going to say feature is no, instead of an opt-in, opt-out like what we are doing here, then you should have created an option flag of some sort where you can choose between the two instead of trying to use the feature flag to do that. But we never talked about adding another feature flag to mean the opposite of the feature flag that we are GAing.
Yeah.
So from the maintenance perspective, like from the perspective of kubeadm, I see this like extra work for us to add more flags or change the current behavior, because I mean we were basically waiting for kubeDNS to go away, and then we can pretty much remove the feature gate. I mean, to me, it's kind of okay. But if you that if you think that we should remove it or change it, I guess we can start with that.
I'm okay with it. I think to just leave it the way it is, so long as we keep on following up to make sure that, and keep on pushing on it so that the defaults are actually changed. Because I think what happens every cycle is that even in 1.11, it was the quote unquote objective to get core DNS to be the default, but then Google pulled the strings at the end of the release because the results were not what they wanted. And then it happened again in 1.12, where it's not defaulted for their configuration. So I think it's a matter of getting everybody on the same page to say, this is the default, and then we'll just remove that flag, and I'm okay with that too. I just don't know when that's going to happen, right?
Yeah, so we should lean on the scalability folks right now to make sure that they are doing the testing that is needed, and give core DNS folks the information they need to so they can fix the problems that we are seeing in scalability, and not wait till another couple of months where we'll land up in the same trouble.
Yeah, basically nobody looked at the scalability tests, and they saw it very late in the cycle. Also, the kubeadm change to enable core DNS as the default was very late. It was 20 days before the release, I think.
Right.
So Fabrizio, dynamic kubelet, that's kind of a mess, and it's not defaulted anywhere that I see. So for testing signal and actually getting this evaluated properly, I don't exactly know how folks plan to do this, right? Because the problem with features like this, which kind of are very analogous to core DNS, unless the rest of the test suite has a defaulted update to enable it, we kind of would be bleeding to get this feature in place, right? Because there's issues that exist right now, and it doesn't look like Google has defaulted the settings.
Yes, but I think that what they are saying is true. So how we test it and how we give access signal on it. But we have also a problem that the join workflow that now tries to enable the dynamic kubelet config on a node cannot work.
Yeah.
So basically we have at least to fix an error on our UX, and then go back and think how we will provide the user instruction to get this feature on, and eventually if and how to test it in our signal.
I think we should probably leave it to alpha. Don't change the gate. And like you say, Fabrizio explained somewhere in the docs, I'm not sure where, that we have a problem with the join workflow. But what was the problem there? If you join, so if the kubelet config is in dynamic kubelet config is enabled on a node, you cannot modify it, or what was the?
Basically, the node have no power to configure the kubelet config for itself. So the dynamic config should be configured from another node with admin credential.
Yeah, that's.
So basically, we cannot solve with the current limitation of kubeadmin, but we have to give instruction to the user.
Yeah. So this is like is it like an architectural problem of the dynamic kubelet config? I think it is, and we have to have time with Michael Tofen and basically sit with him and explain the situation, and maybe he has some ideas of how to approach this.
It would be interesting also to talk with Lucas because basically the current implementation does not fit with what Michael is telling me, and so I don't know what was the original decision behind the current approach.
So maybe we should just set up a time to talk with Michael Taufman early in the cycle.
Okay.
Why don't I put an action item there too?
And given the feature is alpha, do you think what priority should we give this?
I think cleaning up the UX from our side is probably important because we do get issues filed, and it does affect the config, or it could affect the config if we find or discover some issue along the way. So we want to have, if the config is going to beta, that's the highest priority item, I think fixing the current minor UX issues and getting feedback is useful, but it's not, it's like a P1 right now to just do the general cleanup for deprecated. For dynamic kubit configuration, I think just so long as it doesn't affect the configuration too much, we're probably okay, and you can just update some docs.
Yeah, I can help Fabrizio with the docs. Just let me know what exactly do you want me to say there.
Unfortunately, currently you can set up the dynamic kubelet feature flag also in the config for nodes. So this is a minor change that we have to keep in mind.
Right. Next one on the list is control plane joined to beta and automatic stacked etcd and tested automation.
I think that there is a good agreement around automatic stacked etcd. There is an issue. We had some discussion with Jason and Chuck. And I think there is agreement. It's just a matter to find some spot to execute on it.
Do you think you'll have time to execute on this for this cycle?
I take it, and now I'm starting quite fast on the config, and I guess that for the phases that there will be some discussion, so maybe fit in the middle.
So Fabrizio, what do you think is a higher priority, or perhaps what is easier to do, the phases backend, or to move it to init, or the joint control plane joint to beta?
I think that the phases is bigger.
And we should focus.
Yes, yeah. It is 20 command to be somehow refactored, more or less. So it takes time.
Yeah, if it takes a lot of time, we should probably keep in mind that control plane join to beta might not be doable for the cycle if we don't have the time for it, maybe.
I'm okay with that. I think getting the configuration in place is the highest priority. Getting the phases in place is the highest, or the two highest priority items in order for us to get to GA. It's not ideal, but we can solve some of these. We can cleanly have external etcd stand up using some of the other tooling that exists. It would just be nice to have it all lumped into kubeadm.
Yeah, I mean, we can try to get it to beta. We can talk about the next item if you guys want.
New alpha command for changing existing clusters using kubeadm. Is this for like a reconf?
Is this? I didn't get your question.
Is this for like a reconfigure? Like you change the config? Oh, I don't like reconf. Jason, thoughts?
So unless we are going to provide some mechanism to kind of incorporate existing cluster state back into the config that we're storing, I think we have to have reconfig.
But does it live at this layer? That's the weird thing, because you need rationalization, right? Like you need, without a cluster API like controller to like rationalize to say the conf has changed, now I need to change the cluster, right? It seems like it's the wrong layer, right?
I get it. It's just, you know, right now we are storing configuration state in a config map that we act on upgrade, and we don't provide a way to interact with that config map to facilitate reconfiguration during upgrade, or incorporating modifications that have been made to the cluster during upgrade. So we need to either solve one of those two issues, whether it's reconfig or, syncing back the cluster state into the config that we apply during upgrade.
It seems like a layer violation, right? Like, I get what you're saying, but it's kind of like who has ownership to see the world, right? kubeadm is a tool that doesn't actually see the state of the world. It only acts on the data that it has. So it's kind of almost, in a sense, it's partially stateless because it doesn't actually go around and get all the state. It just grabs the state from some other location. So without that ability to see the world, which kind of, I think, lives in the cluster PAPI's domain, some other tool that's above the layer of kubeadm, it's hard for me to see the rationalization of having this capability in kubeadm proper, versus saying, like, you could do it. You have to be very explicit about saying, like, these are the capabilities that kubeadm provides, and it stops there, right? We don't.
Yeah. The only issue that I have right now is the current workflow for how to mutate config in a cluster right now is basically refer to the docs on how do you mutate kind of those individual components. So the workflow right now, after you init a cluster, is then go and manually kind of mutate the static pods for the control plane arguments, for example, or that's the big one. Or you'd go and modify kind of the kubelet configs that are, if you're not taking advantage of the dynamic kubelet configs, you're modifying the kubelet configs that are on disk. And we need a way to, rationalize that so that when upgrade comes, we're not just blowing away some of those modifications.
So I'm just going to say, like, this is kind of like P3 at this point for this release, given how the current workload that we have listed there. I think maybe getting agreement or consensus on how we want to solve this problem, it's a hard problem to solve, right?
Yeah.
I think maybe agreeing upon the approach that we want to do with reconf might be good, but I can't in all honesty think that we would be able to execute on this within this cycle, because it's super thorny.
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to see us kind of agree on an approach forward rather than, just go towards implementing, a possible solution if possible.
Well, we're at time now. Fabrizio, do you have any last comments you want to say on that one?
No, I totally agree. It is a complex problem, and but something is missing. I don't know if Kube Mini is the right place, but I tried to figure out a possible solution to get the discussion started.
Yeah.
I linked the cap, and it will be great to figure out some fixed point around this problem during the cycle, in order to bring back the topic for execution the next cycle, but with a better idea in mind.
Yeah, I agree.
Kubectl apply is definitely not a great UX, so we should start thinking about ways to provide the users with something else.
Yeah. All right. We're at time now, so I think we have a list. All of them have been numbered. If you have questions, comments, complaints, concerns, please add comments to the doc. And I think the obvious ones we're already starting on anyways, right? So there's PRs.
Only one additional comment, that for the config changes,
yeah,
we need a consensus. So now I'm the only one listed on this change, but at least for designing the API before implementing, I need a broader consensus.
Yeah, I will be tagging along with you on that one. All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye.